Sir William Seo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier, Mr. Tauhenare talked about the journey. That's right, he talked about a journey. And if we were to continue on that analogy, the national government has used the journey. Okay, the journey. If we, as he talks about a journey, the national government has used the roadway to recovery as an analogy. If this structure is the vehicle to take the Auckland region forward, then we need a vehicle that can fit everybody in it. And if it's a canoe, then we need everybody to be paddling in the same direction. But what we hear from the other side is a bicycle. How many people fit on a bicycle? One. So I also heard the member from Tauranga say that they were listening, Mr. Speaker. If they are really listening, then we wouldn't be rushing this in urgency. If they are really listening, we wouldn't have had the first bill in urgency. That's the bill that snuffed out the life of 8 local territorial authorities. If they were really listening, they would have heard the voice of thousands of Aucklanders march in downtown in support of my seats. If they were really listening, we wouldn't be flip-flopping on Rodney boundaries in the 11th hour. And after all the community efforts to prepare submission and to take time off work to speak to the Select Committee, all we've gotten from this government is flip-flop back-downs and cabinet-level tantrums. If they were listening, they would have heard the resounding voices of Auckland who are not happy, sir, that you have a minister who represents a party of less than 4% support from this nation, who seems to have so much influence on this national government that they are listening only to him and not the voices of the rest of Aucklanders who are going to be affected by the changes that are being brought about. North Shore Mayor says that Rodney Hyde Super City is a time bomb set to explode grassroots democracy. Aucklanders were promised their big chance to have a say. Aucklanders were promised that they would be listened to, and the only person that the national government seems to be listening to is Mr. Hyde, the Minister of Local Government. And Aucklanders have said, and they would have heard, members of the Select Committee would have also heard, that that isn't right. That isn't right for a party with such small support on a national level to have so much influence that they've likened it to as the dog's tail wagging its head. So I want to say that Aucklanders who are listening now, okay. So what is happening, Mr. Speaker? If we now have significant change processes occurring on a number of fronts, which I believe will ultimately prove unsustainable. Franklin is split in two, with Waihuku in and Pukekohe out, and I've been told that in Franklin is split in two, that on one side of the street it belongs to the Auckland Super City, on the other side of the street it's going to belong to the Waikato region. And if you need a consent, you've got to travel an hour and a half to Hamilton to try and get that consent. Representation on the Auckland Council is undercooked, sir. With 20 councillors representing 1.4 million people, that is a nonsense in the local government sense, especially with around 30 local community boards with subsidiary status to the council, including subsidiary status to the Transport Authority and to Watercare. The Transport Authority in particular will be a very powerful organisation which will hold sway over the boards and I suspect the council. I believe the government has replaced democracy with powerful bureaucratic institutions, sir. I can't see an employee of the Transport Agency fully listening to the members of the Māngere Local Board on some roading maintenance on one of our local streets without some ultimate political sanction from the council way down on Queen Street. Now, I've heard Mr. Carter say that the local boards have been getting powers, and that's right. That's right, we were there. And the beauty of that report is it does to some extent reflect what the community was saying. because it includes a minority report from Labour, it includes a minority report from the Green Party. But the difficult thing for most Aucklanders is, Mr. Chairman,
CO.
the difficult thing is for most Aucklanders to accept is, whilst the report might reflect to a large extent what was being submitted by them, it doesn't align with the ultimate bill that this government puts forward. Because ultimately, the local board's powers, they don't have those powers unless the council gives it. There is no funding, and that is dependent on what the council delivers. There is no staff unless the council says it is okay. And we haven't even decided what those boundaries are, other than what is already there in the bill. So I want to come back again to the issue of on consultation. The word for consultation in Samoa is soalaupule, which, if you were to translate that literally, it means to share authority or to share power. There was expectation from Aucklanders that when the government says that they are listening, that they were hearing what Aucklanders were saying. And I don't believe, sir, that this government has actually taken the time to listen and to hear the words that have been said. What they've done is really just say, yes, we'll listen, and that's good, that's part of consultation. But then they went and did what they wanted to do in the first place. Now they flip-flopped around because some of their major supporters, and, well, maybe not supporters, because when I asked the Honourable John Carter whether he was aware that the people who are most irate about this proposal were their supporters, he said to me, they're not our supporters, they're our members. They're National Party members who are not happy by the way that this government is ramming through this particular process without giving due consultation to the public in Auckland. Why is that important, sir? Because this is significant change. The people of Auckland have rights under the Local Government Electoral Act, and they weren't given to use those rights. They weren't listened to. They haven't been listened to, and the only person that the national government seems to be listening to is Mr. Hyde. And I think the members of the public are now thinking as to why is that, that they only listen to Mr. Hyde and are not listening to the people of Auckland. Because that's what they want to do anyway. Mr. Hyde has been open up about it. He wants to gut Auckland governance there. He wants to sell off the assets that belong to the people of Auckland. National Party are in agreement with it. Mr. Hyde doesn't want any Māori representation. He doesn't believe in being inclusive. He actually sees a small minority being able to govern the Auckland region. And the National Party agree with that, but they have stayed away from it and allowed Mr. Hyde to get all the blame. Mr. Hyde doesn't have anything to say about that, because whether you like it or not, any publicity for the ACT Party, a minority party with less than 4% support from throughout this nation, is important for them. But Mr. Key and the National Party stays away from all of that blame. The blame is on Mr. Hyde. But the real culprit behind this is the National Party, who are egging it on and allowing him free rein to be able to gut local government in Auckland and not listen to the public, even though they use those words. They are hollow words, Mr. Speaker. They are hollow words. And Aucklanders are listening to this debate. Aucklanders know. In fact, I think last week, many people would have seen from this house a picture in an article on the Suburban newspaper, and they have a picture of Mr. Hyde, with his hand out like this, and that is a picture that is reflective of how the general communities are feeling about this. That it is a gutting of democracy, it is undemocratic, and because they're rushing through this process, they're not listening to the people of Auckland, and therefore they're getting things wrong. And the flip-flops on the boundary recognises that, reveals that they're getting things wrong, and I'm afraid that because they're getting things wrong, because they're not listening, the people of Auckland are going to have to pay for the mistakes of the National ACT government.